Well, hello. This has been interesting. Interesting to say the least. Infuriating to say more than that. But if you're here with me on YouTube, I can't thank you enough for, first of all, for checking this out, and second of all, possibly for sticking around through all of that delay. So, at least for today, I'll be with you in the comments in the chat here on YouTube. Since I haven't been able to participate here on YouTube before, and I always had to pick one or the other, and I've been on Facebook previously, so great to see you here. And if you are here with me, let me know where you are, where you're watching from. And today we find ourselves in Armenia, actually, on the little Bach road trip. Little outdoor show today for Bach. And today, of course, we'll be continuing our look at the B minor partita. On Monday, when we began, we were able to look at the Allemande and its double. As you know, this partita is in 4 movements, each with a double. And we looked at the Corrente and got a start on its double, the presto. So my plan for today is to look at that presto, how to practice it kind of as a template for some other fast movements in the Bach. For example, the last movements of all the sonatas. And then we'll do the Sarabande and get a little start on the Sarabande's double as well. Great to see so many of you here from far-flung places. Again, really appreciate you being here with me. So, you know, where we left off, it was on the presto, and I think all that computer mousing and typing and staring at screens has stiffened up my hands. So we're gonna take it slow to start, even though this is presto. And as I say, the practice methods that we'll talk about here can apply to any fast piece, but you know, especially to these fast Bach movements, that all of which combine a lot of string crossings and potentially fast shifts, maybe mixing in some slurs with the separate bows. Awesome. We've got Northern Ireland, Berlin, Argentina, Tunisia, Mexico, Poland, Germany, and even Torrance, California. No less glamorous. But hey, I'm in Pasadena. That's the famous song is the old lady from Pasadena. So. When I'm getting my hands around something, I constantly remind myself to shape. Not only is it a bad habit, or you know, promotes bad habits, to just kind of, you know, because you get locked into one way of making sound, you start accumulating tension usually, even though you may not realize it. But that kind of practice is not going to do anything for my eventual performance of the piece. And it's really not any harder, and certainly a lot more fun, to go ahead and shape. You don't have to come up with crazy, outlandish ideas. We can start with following the line. That when the line goes down, let the sound diminish. Line goes up, we crescendo. We can always start there. We finally have a shift, and I managed to let you hear a lot more of it than I would like. Let's take a look at that shift, since fast shifting is a necessary skill if you're going to play a lot of fast notes. A lot of times we think about or we talk about hiding a shift. And I have to say, I learned this way of doing things early on. And in the meantime, it's something that I've tried to unlearn. A lot of times when we try to hide a shift in a fast passage, we'll do one of two things, or we may do both things. Try to hide it with the right hand and hide it with the left hand. In the right hand, that often means putting a nice little space there. When it gets very fast, it might not be that big a deal. Could you catch that? There's a little bit of a bump, right? A little bit of a space right before the shift. It's not the worst thing in the world, but could still be smoother, couldn't it? I don't necessarily want my listeners, who, you guys are generally violinists, but even my listeners who aren't violinists, I certainly wouldn't want them to know that something technical is going on. What if I also kind of hide it with the left hand? Kind of ghost the hand up there. That works okay with, again, when the notes are very fast. But it's a dangerous habit to get into if you ever want to be able to, to be able to connect under a slur. The fact is that it's not necessary to do either of those things in order for listeners not to hear the shift. All I really have to do is time the shift, put it exactly in the right place. I can be smooth with the bow. See, if I didn't have the shift, I would connect those notes. I'd like to do the same thing, even though I'm shifting. So I'm going to put that shift at the end of the old bow. In this case, that's a down bow. And then change the bow. If I put it late enough and do the shift quick enough, then it falls right in the crack, and I can still be smooth with the bow. I can leave the left hand in the string. Now I put that later. Both hands remain connected to the instrument. It's better for intonation. There's no gap in sound, and it's going to sound nice and smooth when things get faster. That one, I did a little late. You heard a little. That tells me that I did it a little bit on the new bow. So it's worth getting to know those two sounds. If you really want to be picky with yourself, and who doesn't want to be, about where that shift is going to fall. Learn the different sounds between doing it too early or too late. They're subtly different undesirable sounds, right? And right in the middle, if a certain shift is just, the timing is too particular, then you can always give yourself a little margin for error. Yes, by making a tiny space with the bow. You can always use that to cover it slightly. But I always aim for smoothness in the bow. Of course, this moment is going to go by in a flash, but if I build that habit in all those shifts, then I'm going to be able to play music like this much more cleanly. So as always, well, no, not as always. Previously, I was not keeping an eye on the comments and chat here on YouTube. This time, remember, I am. So if you have questions or comments for me as we go along, please let me know. So I've been playing under tempo, of course, and as you've heard me say in other sessions of this Bach, my least favorite technique for getting things fast is to work it up with the metronome, right? I wrote a whole article on this, in fact, my rules for the metronome. Technically, there are no rules, but I made some rules for great effective metronome practicing, and that's one of them is working it up with the metronome, make that the last resort, because it takes the most time and it requires the least thinking. what I'd rather do is figure out why I can't play something fast, solve that problem, and then play it faster. If I'm out of ideas, if I can't figure out why I can't play it fast, then of course I may just have to resort to gradually getting it faster. But in this case, let's see what happens now if it goes faster. No huge hurdles there. I wasn't totally satisfied with a couple of the bigger string crossings, meaning the ones that go across two strings. We've got a couple of those so far, right? Like if I start at bar 7. So there it's an arm timing thing, right? My arm has got to be on the way to the D string while I'm still playing that note on the E string. If I only start moving it there when I need the note, I'm going to get some extra noise on the way, or I may play the D string but not fully have the focus into the string yet. So that's the same in reverse, from G to A. So that's worth doing slowly, and this brings to mind another great technique, which is to double up the notes, or even you can triple them as well. And so what this helps me do is to time that arm again. If I'm playing two notes on the E string, I want to use the second of those two to move over. I could even triple them. The nice thing about tripling the notes is that you keep the same bow direction as you'll have for the single notes, right? Because it's an odd number. So in this case, again, the last note of the 3 is where I want to move it over. So that's a nice way to get the timing of the string crossings. Let me tell you one more benefit of that practice technique that I overlooked for a while. When you play slowly, the bow also moves slowly, unless you really try to use a lot of bow, thereby using a fast bow, right? I could do that. But probably if I'm practicing slowly, I'm going to be using the same amount of bow I'll be using when it's fast. But because it's a slow tempo, the bow will be moving slower. I'm sticking on this point because I really want you to understand there's a reason for that. Look at my contact point. I'm talking now about the 3 variables, right? Speed, pressure, and contact point. And if you need a refresher on that, go to natesviolin.com. I've got an article and a guide on the 3 variables if you want a refresher on how those interact. But look at my contact point. It's quite near the bridge. And I can do that because the bow is moving slowly. What if I try to keep that bow there and play fast? It's completely unacceptable, right? It's that ponticello sound. I would never do that, right? Instinctively, my bow would instantly go out. But now, when the bow's out there, the distance between the strings is completely different. The distance between G and D is a lot smaller. Not only that, but the string feels different. It's a little springier out here. A whole lot of things have just changed. So if I've only practiced slowly here, and then I try suddenly to play fast out there, there may be a lot of mismatches. If you use the technique that we just talked about, tripling the notes, it lets the left hand move slowly, but the right hand still moves fast. And now look at the contact point. It's right where I'm going to be eventually. So that is a great benefit when you're still learning the notes, practicing for intonation. You get the feel in the bow that you're going to have eventually. Good. Let me see some questions and comments for you. And Peter, you make a good point. When I was talking about smoothing that shift later, there would be a lot of alternative fingerings that you could do if you didn't like that shift in that place. Right? You could get up to third in advance. So that would be one way if you didn't like trying to navigate that shift there. I don't mind doing fewer shifts as long as I can smooth that one, but that's a good point. And just for those wondering, yeah, this session today is not going to be on Facebook. I think that warms some of your hearts anyway. A lot of people don't like being on Facebook, especially these days. But simple fact was I just couldn't get, I could get it to post to my personal page, but that's not where I've sent everyone. And so I didn't want it in the wrong place. Good. And Bill, you mentioned how especially a lot of early instrument type performances would be more rhythmically free. And well, so your question is, does it make sense to consider such ideas? Absolutely. I think we should consider every idea. And, you know, it doesn't have to be, it's not going to be the same over your whole life, right? I mean, the way that I approach these now, very different from how I used to. A movement like this, I still see as a, I don't want to say showpiece exactly, but a brilliant instrumental piece, and I want to use whatever means I can to, you know, dazzle the audience while still remaining true to the, you know, relating it to the Corrente. Remember that each double follows the chords of its main movement. So we had... some people like to keep an exact tempo relationship. In other words, if we had beat, 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 they would want to play. I don't know that it has to be exactly the same. As long as I can relate my listeners' ears back to that main movement, and, you know, not to make it sound silly. For example, I just wouldn't play this movement off the string. For me, that takes it out of the realm that we were in the main movement. And I mentioned that in the last session. But as far as the rhythmical freedom, absolutely. And I think the places, what I would want you to think of and consider is where and why you need the time. In other words, not just to look for ways to change the rhythm, but to ask yourself why. Maybe it's a chord change. You know, we've got one chord change, another chord change. In fact, we seem to be changing chords every bar, right? So probably it's not going to be a great idea to point out every one of those with time, right? So you start thinking which might be the surprising ones, because those might be places to linger for a moment or to highlight with the use of time. I would probably say that in this movement, I would have a harder time changing the rhythm very much, but when I do, I would want there to be some musical, usually a harmonic reason for it. So that's a great question, Bill. A question about vibrato in fast passages. You know, the faster you play it, the less time there is for vibrato. But this goes along very well, actually, with the last question about rhythmic freedom. Vibrato, I wouldn't want it to be too square. For example, I wouldn't want to vibrate like every downbeat and only those. So they would be important notes, notes where I might be taking time anyway. What I do like, and it's not exactly vibrato, but I like a flexibility, a life in the hand, and maybe it's more of a mental difference than anything else, but I don't love my hand to just feel like, you know, robotic. I'd like for it to feel like it's the kind of feeling that you naturally get when you slur. If you play this slurred and your hand feels substantially different from how it feels when you're playing separate, then chances are you've got some tension that you could afford to lose in the separate bow version. So again, it's not exactly vibrato because there's not much time for it here, but the way that the notes can just ripple over each other, that's what I'd like even when the bow may be articulating. So that the hand feels nice and light. Another way, don't forget to build that, is simply by varying how hard you press. So many of these techniques I haven't yet made videos for, but I have made a video for this one here on YouTube called MVP, Minimum Violin Pressure. And just as a quick summary of that, you start by playing finger pressure so light that it's actually just harmonic finger pressure. And a lot of these notes don't correspond to harmonics, so it'll just be useless noise. However, you do it anyway with a strong bow. So I'm not hearing the real notes of the piece now, right? And that's very hard for some people to do, to play with a strong bow, because the sound is weird, to play with a strong bow, but fingers so light that they're harmonics. What's easier for most people is to press just a little bit more so that you're hearing the notes, but they're not pure. Again, keeping the bow strong as it will be in performance. Gradually, you add one more level of pressure where it's still, you're really hearing the note. You're clearly hearing the notes, but there's still some fuzz on them. You add one more degree. Now the notes are pure, even though it feels like I'm pressing really lightly. And that's because that happens to be all the pressure I need in this passage. So you work at it from nothing, practically, to the minimum. Good. A couple more questions, and then we'll go on with some other music. Improving stamina in this movement. And yeah, with repeats, I find it hard to keep momentum and strength. That is an issue in this piece. In a way, the sonatas are a little easier in that regard because those fast movements come only at the end, right? The G minor, the A minor, the C major. The last movement is the fast one. So if you're performing it, you can kind of feel, you know, I've got a lot in the tank. You know, I'm really gonna, or, you know, really take it fast, or, you know, let me be a little bit more contemplative, right? You can make a lot of things work. Here, we're not even halfway through the piece, and you've got this blazing movement, yes, with repeats if you choose to take them, which you don't have to. This is a great question to come after what we were just talking about. This question of stamina, it's inextricably related or bound with tension. So the less tension that you can carry, the less effort that you have to put into this music, the faster you'll be able to play it and the less tired you will get. So it's I'd like you to try two things if stamina is an issue for you. One is the MVP exercise, because if you can get rid of a lot of left hand tension, that is going to improve so much in your playing, especially fast playing. And the other thing is, try playing this piece quietly. In fact, there is no dynamic marking on it. The character seems to imply that it should at least start fairly strong. But there's no dynamic marking. Try playing it quietly. If that's a lot easier for you stamina-wise, then there's a mismatch, right? Because this is the violin, or it's not, construction work or something where you got to bring these huge muscles to bear on the problem. It shouldn't take that much more effort to play these quick notes forte than piano. But mentally, we create a difference. So if it's easy for you to play quietly, I can get through it, no problem. But then forte, there's a problem. Need to identify where the tension is coming in. For some people, it may just be in the right hand, and it may be a question of using too much bow, right? Sometimes when it's fast and loud, we start really cranking with the bow. Not only does that force you to go even further out where you're likely to hit extra strings, but it's just way too hard on the arm. So you just don't need that much. Yeah. So that's the other thing I would test. See if it's a lot easier quiet than loud. Good, and the last question for now, how to balance good quality sound on short notes with not much bow. And I would say that's, there you look back to those three variables. It's perfectly easy to get good quality on short notes with very little bow if you have the right contact point and pressure. So if you're trying to do that very close to the bridge, something's not right. I'm getting that ponticello sound. I would have to really increase the pressure here to get a pure sound. That's a pure sound, but man, the pressure is so much that I'm getting so much articulation. You get that quote unquote helicopter sound, right? So now let me move out, but keep that same pressure. That's not working either. Now I'm getting that other kind of bad sound, the crunchy, the crushed sound. So now I'm going to lighten up the pressure. And there we have a match. So it's short bow. Now I may still have to adjust, on the G string is going to be further away from the bridge than the E string, and you'll see that. If I play a passage like that. Good. Ron, okay, I said that other one was the last question, but now I'm curious since I've got you, well, you're not exactly a captive audience, but, but you are here, so you can help me out with this. Ron asks, seems to be a different sound today. Is something changed? The pickup, the violin. Everything is the same except for the preamp, and I'm hoping that it's better. So I'm curious what your impression is if you've watched others of these on YouTube. But same microphone placement, same me, hopefully, violin and bow. I'm simply using a different preamp in the hopes of boosting my voice a little bit compared to the playing and maybe even getting a sweeter sound for the violin. But you'll have to tell me if I'm hitting the mark with that. Because if it's a worse sound, then I'll go back to the old or tinker some more. And Bill, same stamina advice for the E major preludio. Absolutely. As well as maybe a mental shift there. I had mentioned how, in this piece, for example, this fast movement is coming in the middle, and so it's possible to use up all your energy in the middle of the piece. E major preludio, it's even worse. It's the first movement of this long partita, and and by the like, and then you try to, I've been in that situation. So yes, you got to pace yourself, pace your energy. Okay, great. Well, I'm getting some good comments on the sound, just technically how I'm delivering the sound to you. So take that, Facebook. You're not getting the good sound today. Good. Let's move on to the Sarabande. I know we got a late start today, so we'll probably go a little over time if that's all right with you. But now, a Sarabande, again, a dance. Every one of these four main movements is a dance. And as I mentioned on Monday, it's up to us how literally we want to take that. I think it's the older I get, the more interested I am to have these movements be danceable. When I first learned these, I wanted them to sound good as violin pieces, which they should, but I wasn't so concerned with the feel of the dance. A Sarabande, actually, like the opening movement of this partita, like the Allemande, is a slow dance, and there are two super famous Sarabandes that I am thinking of right now. One of them we're going to get to in just a couple weeks because it's the last movement of the D minor partita, the Chaconne. The Chaconne is a special kind of Sarabande, but slow, broad, usually not a particularly gay or happy dance. Doesn't always have to be in minor, however. You think of the Chaconne, that character's pretty clear, right? Broad dance in 3, usually the strong beat is on 2, so rest. 2. So forgive me. The other really famous Sarabande is, not for the violin, but again, the Goldberg variations, strong beat, often on 2. That's a happier one, but it's not ecstatic kind of happy, right? This Sarabande, though not as famous, a similar idea, although we have the complication of chords here, just like we would in the Chaconne. So let's get a little look at this. Got myself into trouble. Without a second repeat there. Not that I Definitely wouldn't take that repeat in performance, but I don't want to mess up that same bar twice, so I'm going to cut my losses there. Again, the question of tempo. Some play slower than this. It's certainly also possible to go faster. This would be already a slowish dance, so if I got much slower, I could sustain the notes more. I would probably then use more vibrato. For me, that would make it less danceable, but I've often heard it that way, and I could get into that maybe. Starts seeming a little sad to me there. What if we take it the other way? Even faster than the original playthrough. Yeah, I like that too. So the tempo will change the kind of sound I make, right? I'm sustaining less in this tempo. It's easier in almost any music you play. It's easier the faster you go to keep the big picture in mind. It may be more difficult to fill in all the details though. So you always want that balance. Let's throw one more wrinkle in there. Okay, since I'm getting one note that I'm distorting a little, let me change one thing. I turned a knob, and we'll see. This is a new thing, a little bit of this compression to try to even things out. And you can let me know if distorts again. I always want there to be, at least in a movement like this, at least two interesting things going on. If you imagine again those Goldberg variations, such a simple thing created with basically just two voices. But with the bass line that I don't find myself able to play simultaneously. I'm sure there's an arrangement for solo violin there somewhere. But so in this Sarabande, as in all the Bach movements with double stops, I really want to encourage you to avoid always favoring the top line, you know, the so-called melody, right? I always want there to be, as well, some interest in the bass line. Let me play it on the faster side, pardon me, play it on the faster side to make it easier to pick up on that bass line. Bach writes such amazing bass lines always. So there I not only played it faster, but I lingered more on the bass notes. I'd want to strike a balance there in performance. To put the bass notes on the beat, let you, the listeners, or if you're the performer, let your listeners hear those bass notes without making the melody seem too wacky, too out of time. And the techniques to do that we talked about quite a bit in the G minor sonata, so I won't rehash them all here. But in general, I like to think of those bass notes on the beat. People tend to key into the melody anyway, so they will probably reconstruct the rhythm just fine there. But if you're always putting the bass notes early or treating them like grace notes, then you almost might as well not play them at all, because they'll be lost. And those bass notes are such a great guide to you, the performer, as to how you might want to shape these. Jonathan, you're absolutely right. This is in Armenia. We find ourselves in Armenia now, so good pickup on that. Good. Well, curse my technical luck today. I'm not going to be able to extend us too much longer, so I apologize for the late start. But I do want to mention a couple hemiola, or possible hemiola moments. And hemiola simply means that in bars of 3, we would perform or hear it as if it's in groups of 2. So if you look after the second ending, we've got here. So we could just keep thinking in 3 if we want. However, it's possible from the way that it's grouped, and if you look at the bass line for these 2 bars that I'm thinking of, it's bars 13 and 14. That suggests groups of 2 to me. Again, could stay in 3. But let's try it in 2, go slowly and see how that comes out. I like that because I can stress that D sharp in the bass line to let it resolve to the E. If I'm only grouping them in 3, then it doesn't really make sense to stress that D sharp. So let me put it in context and you can see what you think. And then there's another hemiola to end the movement, another possible one. So now we're back in 3. So those are the kind of one of many fun things to play around with in this music. Look at bar 18 if you would. The way that it's written, we've got quarters in the bass, but in the top we've got slurred. If I just hold everything exactly as printed, it's a little strange because this whole time I've been articulating the bass line, and now suddenly I play, or would be nice if the bass could sound as it did before. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to release the bass note. So and then come back. So I come off the D string and back. So what I'm hoping to hear in the bass is 1, rest. So here it is with all the parts. Got it, sort of. So that's something else to listen for, and you won't find that exactly marked in the music. You'll have to just honor system for how the bass line is sounding to you. finally, you could do a hemiola at the very end as well. We've got, here I'll play it just ordinary grouped in 3 as it's barred. That downbeat bothers me. There's nothing there's a rest in the melody, and yet I'm leaning on that bass note. How about, yeah, I think that makes more sense. So yeah, so then we've got, a lot of perfect intervals in this, a lot of fourths, a lot of fifths. Could be worth your time to practice some scales, especially in fifths. Those are the ones that are gnarly to finger. So let me take just a few of your questions. Since you've been so kind enough to wait for me beforehand. Good. Sherry, you ask in terms of sound, how much does a good bow make with fast passages? How much difference does a good bow make? I think you mean with fast passages. It makes some difference. Certain bows, and it's so subjective, but I think you've all had the experience of playing on some bows where it seems like they want to jump off the string and you kind of have to push them down. And other bows, it's like they just feel glued to the string, and maybe you have to work to take them off. And then the best of all is when the bow just seems to do what you want it to do. It's glued to the string. However, when you want to pick it up, it springs right off. So sure, it's great if you can be playing a bow like that. I would almost always rather, if I had to choose, I would like one that feels connected to the string as a default, because that certainly means a lot less work, right? Couple wrong notes there. Bow wasn't going to help me with that. But yeah, so some difference. It'll make some difference. But with any bow, more important by far is that match of contact point, speed, and pressure. And yeah, Blake, you asked about my E string. Yeah, so I have these geared pegs on here from Whitner. So I have no fine tuners on this instrument, just the pegs. So with these pegs, it takes 8 turns to equal 1 turn of a normal peg. So I love them. I would never go back. Stefan, you mentioned, yes, the ornaments, trills, and I think that, yeah, you're referring to the Sarabande. Yeah, this movement, perhaps out of all the ones we've played so far, I feel could lend itself the most to ornamentation. It's something I've experimented with some, and it's just, it's sometimes I think a lack of courage, I haven't made a special study of the kinds of ornaments and all of that. There is a string trio arrangement, of course, a very famous string trio arrangement of the Bach Goldberg variations. And in that, you really get to learn all kinds of different trills, turns, ornaments, trill endings, and those, to work in Bach's language need to be done a certain way, or at least there are certain combinations that make more sense than others. And although I've played that, I haven't extended that study to feel super confident doing it in these. But, it's something I hope to do more of in the future. I think when you do that, you want to delight and amuse your audience without distracting your audience. So the people who do it most successfully draw attention to, again, the harmonic progressions without losing the line. And Snowy, I'm going to assume that's not your real name, Snowy, Minnesota, but it could be. How necessary is it to sustain the bass notes? as opposed to rolled chords? Well, you know, the idea of sustaining the bass notes, it's really about the speed of the roll, isn't it? So if I've got a 4-note chord, I could play only the bass note to start, right? I could do it kind of a 1 and 3, which would draw more attention to the bass note. Or I could do 2 and 2, but maybe just lean a bit more on the lower string. That's the one with the most flexibility, right? Because I'm never on a single string, but I can still shade it one way or the other. There would be a few exceptions where I'd maybe play 1 note on the bottom. And for me, that's the most flexible way to let my listeners hear the bass notes without making too many other compromises. Good. And finally, I've got here one last question. Talk about how to work on tension within the context of chorded pieces. A lot of this is mental. I don't mean that, you know, it's all in your mind, but sometimes when we see those 4 notes or 3-note chords, it's like we're trying to play all the notes at once. You know, we've got to bear down to get those 3 notes out or those 4 notes out. And if you really just think about it again as 2 and 2, or 2 and 1, you know, however you're going to play it, it's really not that different a stroke, you know. Or what usually happens, I find, is that someone will play a sound that they don't like, either because they have the wrong contact point, or too far out, or it's simply out of tune, in which case it won't ring, it's not as loud, and so put more effort in. So the first thing I would encourage is to find a beautiful sound, and yes, make it trending toward forte, you know, but find that great combination of those 3 variables. You know, for so much of the chorded music, for me, it's going to be right in that sweet spot, right in between the bridge and the fingerboard. And then to find the pressure and speed that will go along with that. Then generally I find that I can draw the sound out of the violin, meaning thinking horizontally rather than vertically. And that helps stop me from accumulating tension. And I think that's what you're asking about really, is especially the fugues, you know, where there's so many chords coming so quickly. Usually I find the tension comes because they're unsatisfying sounds, and unconsciously people are trying irrelevant things to combat it, you know, pressing more, or you know, they're trying to adjust the bow when it's actually the intonation that was the problem. So I hope thinking along those lines will help as far as tension in those pieces. Great. Again, can't thank you enough for being here with me. We're going to close on Friday looking at the double of the Sarabande, and then the bourrée and its double. And that's going to bring us to the close of the week, and next week we'll continue the trip with the second sonata, the A minor sonata. But first, we'll close out this great B minor partita on Friday. Same time, well, hopefully not the same time as today, because today was late. I'll see what work I can do on the Facebook end, because I would like to make good on my promise to stream there live as well. But I'll definitely be here on YouTube as well, and I will let you know. If you're not signed up for updates with me, then just go to the link in this description, or perhaps it's the description of the first Bach on the Road video here on YouTube, so that you can see where to let me know how to stay in touch with you, so that I can let you know if technical difficulties are happening. All right, see you really soon. Bye.